My name is Jay Bordage, Associate Professor of Art at the Institute of Art and Design. My concentration is graphic design, but I've had many hats. My professional history before NEC, I didn't start off being a professor, although I think I always knew I wanted to teach. I started off in a degree in psychology and I worked in human services for quite some time, and then made the switch by going back to art school, both in undergrad and graduate school. In graduate school, I was teaching as a graduate teaching fellow, and I knew at that point that that was definitely something I wanted to have a career in. And I eventually got a job at this very small college called Chester College. At one point, the school closed down, and so New England College stepped into that role and invited a couple of faculty to kind of transition over with them. I think initially just to provide a familiar face and maybe some guidance to those students who came over. One of the things about NEC that I've always loved is the fact that I have been in other institutions. I've taught at Tufts and the museum school, and though I very much value those experiences, I find that sometimes professors can be territorial. That is certainly not the case at NEC. I find that they're very outgoing, they're very generous with their time and their knowledge. I found it a very welcoming experience to come here. Daryl Furtkamp is a friend of mine, and he was one of the first people I got to know when I was here. In some ways, I have to attribute both he and Devin with basically my vocational change. I was very interested in the arts from a very young age and took a stab at writing for a while, writing plays. And then going into my senior year at Oberlin College with a degree in psychology, I took an art class. It was a sculpture class. And I fell in love with it and it couldn't get it out of my head. And so that kind of created this trajectory. But the trajectory was always, it was in sculpture, and then I kind of moved into different media like photography and video for graduate school, but never painting. I was good at drawing, and that was a facility that I had. And then I was just happened to be going through the studios where Daryl and Devin were teaching painting classes, and I was just looking at stuff on the easel and became fascinated and kind of impassioned with it. So I started just on my own, just quietly in my studio. I started making little paintings and then sending them off to Daryl and Devin saying, what do you think? And they would provide comments and they would make suggestions. And so I kind of had a little art thing on the side. And what I'm doing now, what I did in my sabbatical, what I plan to do when I retire is paint. And I have to lay that at their feet. The other person that was really important, especially early on, was Inez, who taught art history. We did some wonderful collaborations in terms of immersion classes. We once went to Rome and then we went to Venice. And I think both of them were great, but I would count that my immersion trip with Inez to Venice as being one of the kind of keystone experiences of my time here at NEC. Bill Cass has been amazing. He has a coffee machine. He makes me coffee sometimes, which is just, so touching, right? He's asked, do you need coffee? I always need coffee. The photo group is astounding too. Both Glenn and Yoav do great work in different spheres. The Venice trip that I talked about has to be up there. We took this group of students who have had art history and have taken art, but thinking about curation, we had them actually build installations themselves and kind of think about how you curate a show. We got it so that by the time we got to Venice, Inez and I stopped teaching and we said, okay, you know how to do this. Go out someplace, find a show in Venice, bring it back to us and talk to us about it. What worked, how you responded to it, how do you feel the concept was executed? And I think that is NEC in a nutshell. We're very much about experiential learning. Bear in mind, some of these students had never been on a plane before. And a lot of them were first generation. A lot of them had never been to Europe. And I think they did beautifully. And so seeing the transformation from beginning to end, that was one of the highlights of my time here. Graphic design is an interesting discipline within the fine arts because it definitely does straddle fine arts and the commercial sector and business. You're always in a collaborative experience with your client. And so one of the things that I want my students to understand is that There's never a point in a graphic designer where you've learned your craft, because every time you have a new client, you have to become a mini expert in the thing that they are trying to do, trying to solve problems for them. So I want my students to understand that they're never going to be able to let up in terms of learning. They're always going to have to be curious. They're always going to have to be mutable to the situation that they're working with. And I think that that is probably a great position to be in, not just as a designer, but as a person in general. This is not the end of your learning process. The best thing you can get from a college experience is the skills to learn effectively so that you become a student for the rest of your life. There was this one student, she was pretty vocal. She had a lot of trouble sitting down, and she was brilliant. She was a graphic design major. I realized that she was definitely somebody who couldn't sit down all the time. So I allowed her to have breaks. There were times when she was working and she was on the work table rather than beside the work table. I think there's some institutions that wouldn't stand for that kind of thing, but I knew that being a kinetic learner myself, I knew that she needed to move. She won the art award at the school. I've called her back on a number of occasions for my seniors to talk about her trajectory from the school, transitioning from graphic design to fine arts. And I was working on my website and I'm saying, why am I doing this? This student is so much better than I am. And so I have hired her to create my website, and I'm pretty picky. I want anybody who comes here to know that they have a great support network, not just with their colleagues, but I think that the administration is very supportive as well. There seems to be this desire to make sure that the professionals are nurtured and grow both professionally and as a teacher. And I would encourage them to team teach. I feel that team teaching is something that is very much encouraged in this organization. And if you want to grow as a teacher, this is one of the best opportunities. I've just learned so much. Because of the small class sizes, you're going to have an opportunity to watch students develop their own trajectory for success. And I would just encourage teachers to enjoy participating in that journey with them. I will be traveling to places where painting is existing that I'm very much interested in, because I know right now in the Netherlands, in the late spring and summer, Anselm Kiefer, who's one of my heroes, has a big show there. But mostly it's to bring back information for my studio practice. My goal really is to have a daily studio practice where I'm in working, painting, and getting better. I almost want them to know how much the school meant to me. I think I've said this in my retirement letter, that my time at NEC I count as the professional accomplishment I'm proudest of. And I'll never forget this place. I want people to think of me as somebody who will always look fondly at his experience here. My leaving is bittersweet. If I had all the time in the world, I'd probably continue teaching for God knows how long. But, time is finite, and there was just this other thing I wanted to do. I don't feel like I'm leaving anything. I'm just going towards something else.